One of the most terrifying monsters from the Jurassic period was the Liopleurodon. But exactly how terrifying this monster really was is under debate. Its size has been greatly exaggerated and greatly contested between experts. The dinosaur was first featured in a BBC programme titled Walking with Dinosaurs, which first aired back in 1999. In the programme, it was grossly exaggerated as being over 80 feet long. While some scientists do concede that it could be upwards of 50 feet, a more accurate representation would place this sea beast at being around 30 feet. The Liopleurodon was a type of marine reptile known as a pliosaur. It would have had a very short neck, an elongated head, and super long flippers. Basically, it looked kind of like a torpedo with flippers. There were many different types of pliosaurs in the Jurassic period, and they were distributed all over the world just like modern sharks. And yes, the Liopleurodon was an apex predator. Part of this was because it was a super fast swimmer, again like modern sharks. Imagine a shark mixed with a lizard and a T-Rex. This was kind of what a Liopleurodon looks like.
When it comes to octopi and squids, you honestly don't hear too much about them attacking humans. Sure, you hear stories about the legendary Kraken tearing up ships and attacking sailors, but in reality, they rarely, if ever, go after people. Unless your name is Lance Carlson, apparently. This happened in Australia, and the event occurred in March of this year. Lance was with his daughter at a popular beach spot when he saw something come out of the water. He soon realized that it was an octopus jumping out of the water, something you definitely don't see every day, and then proceeded to film it. And as he did, the octopus lunged at him on the beach. I took that footage, it lashed out at me and I was quite surprised. Then it swam off into deeper water, Carlson told CNN Friday. Now, that might not sound like an attack, but trust us, we're not done, and neither was the octopus. While swimming nearby soon after, Carlson was examining a pile of crab shells when he felt a whipping sensation across his left arm, followed by a second strike across his neck and upper back. Within a minute, a perfect imprint of an octopus tentacle appeared on Carlson's neck and back. Carlson had to scramble out of the water while being blinded by ink and was taken to his hotel room where, we kid you not, Coca-Cola was used to try and treat his wounds. The pain went away, and more than anything since then, it's been more the physical hit that was painful. The imprint on my neck in those photos is more from the physical hit, and I guess it makes complete sense when you look at the video I took 20 minutes earlier of that lashing out, he said. To reiterate, octopi aren't known for attacking humans, but this is a perfect example of why you don't tempt fate, even if you're getting a good video recorded at the time.
There was once a horrifying sea monster skulking through the world's oceans like a real-life basilisk. Its name is Pleurodon serpentis, and it was the type of mosasaur that scientists agree hunted like a giant snake. The fossils of this ancient monster have been found primarily in Morocco. There have been at least 40 species of mosasaur found to date, making them some of the most prolific underwater hunters in the dinosaur world. They became dominant predators after the mass extinction during the middle of the Cretaceous period and then began changing and evolving into many different species over the next 25 million years. Of course, that was until a large rock fell out of the sky 66 million years ago and ruined everything. According to Nick Longrek, a paleontologist who's obsessed with mosasaurs, these creatures were just beginning to hit their stride when they were wiped off the face of the earth. But how did these real-world basilisks hunt? They stalked their prey through the darkness of the ocean, with some of them evolving flippers, others having tails, and almost all of them slithering around like giant snakes. Some could grow to at least 27 feet, over 8 meters long. They had teeth like razors for killing fish and giant squid. The only difference between the mosasaur and the deadly basilisk from Harry Potter is that the mosasaur wasn't toxic.
The first thing you need to know about the Basilosaurus is that it was not properly named. When this ancient creature was first discovered, the researchers believed it was a marine reptile, and so they named it Basilosaurus, which translates to king lizard. However, after further review, it turned out that the undersea monster was actually a mammalian. There was a proposed name change. Researchers wanted to name it Zeuglodon, which would translate to yolk teeth. However, because the name was already registered, it could not be changed. In any case, you probably want to hear about how ferocious this beast really was. The average size of the Basilosaurus was about 60 feet in length. That's a lot bigger than any modern day shark. It was one of the earliest whales that ever swam in the ocean, even though it was descended from terrestrial mammals. This is one of the only ancient animals that gives us a direct glimpse into the way it evolved. Its front flippers still had elbow joints at the time of its extinction. This is something that is only glimpsed today in seals. This means its flippers would have at one point been legs. Just like fish can evolve out of the sea, land animals can evolve into the ocean. It's believed that this dinosaur primarily ate smaller whales and big fish. Because of its massive size, it wasn't often eaten as prey. There wasn't much that could challenge it.
You're going to be hearing about a lot of shark attacks on this list, but this is easily one of the most terrifying encounters with them ever. Because it wasn't about one shark attacking, it was about waves of them attacking. It was near the end of World War II in 1945, and the United States was getting ready to make and drop the atomic bombs on 2 targets in Japan. But the uranium needed to be transported to a certain site close to Japan. The USS Indianapolis was assigned that job. They completed the job and shipped out again in the Philippine Sea. They never made it to their next target though, as they were found by a Japanese submarine who sank the ship. Hundreds survived the attack by the sub, but the problem was for them that no one knew where they were due to this being a secret mission even after the delivery of the uranium. Add to that, they were very far from land, and this spot in the sea was full of predators. As we alluded to before, it was full of sharks, and those sharks were circling them and were very hungry. Many of the crew were in a panic state, to the point that they were attracting the sharks to them, and thus they were slowly picked off, one by one. These sharks were noted to be relentless, and this went on for 4 days without food, water, and being baked by the sun. The fact that any of those crewmen were able to survive was a miracle. Eventually, a routine plane sweep of the area led to the survivors being found. Rescue operations went late into the night, but those who made it were brought back home. This remains one of the deadliest shark attacks in the history of the world due to the number of deaths by the sharks and the aggressive nature of the sharks as a whole. It's true that this kind of encounter is rare for various reasons, but it shows just how deadly sharks can be when the right circumstances line up.
In Alaska, tourists filmed what can only be described as a horrifying dragon. The video footage clearly showed some kind of monster swimming underwater near a collapsed glacier with 7 sharp black fins poking out from the surface. It looked as though the strange dragon was covered in dinosaur-like spikes. It surfaced just enough for the shape of it to be seen in the video clip before vanishing underwater and not resurfacing. So far, nobody can explain what the tourists saw. It appeared to be massive, maybe upwards of 20 feet or 6 meters in length. Some have speculated that the creature woke up when the nearby glacier began to crash into the ocean. It could be that it was slumbering deep in a hidden lair under the ice and was woken up by all the commotion. Of course, there are some who claim the video to be fake, but that honestly doesn't seem to be the case this time. And while it might not be an ancient sea dragon in the end, there's no doubt that it is some kind of freakish creature nobody has been able to identify. And to make matters even more mysterious, this was not the first time that an unidentified creature has been filmed swimming around in Antarctic waters.
This one should probably be number 1 on the list. I can't think of anything more terrifying than a sea scorpion the size of an adult human. That's right, somewhere around 460 million years ago, there was a giant sea scorpion swimming around in the waters that covered present-day Iowa. According to Life Science, the giant scorpions likely fed on squishy eel-like creatures. They weren't really scorpions, but they sure looked like it. The prehistoric sea scorpions were more closely related to modern spiders and horseshoe crabs. But that doesn't make them any less unnerving. Just imagine something half lobster, quarter spider and quarter crab grabbing you by the legs while you're trying to go for a swim. The approximate size of the sea scorpions was somewhere around 5.6 feet long. If nothing else, it was definitely a strange animal. It had special rear legs that worked as paddles, and it had a second and third pair of limbs which were used for grabbing prey. Then, it also had 3 additional pairs of limbs in the back which were used for scrambling across the ocean floor. Basically, it could swim using paddles, run using legs, and pinch you with its long front arms. The sea scorpion fossils were discovered at the bottom of a meteorite crater, a massive scar on the planet that would have formed about 470 million years ago during a meteor event. There were over 150 fossil fragments discovered at this site, including the man-sized sea scorpions. Remember to let me know which creature you think is the scariest in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more videos like these.
The Atlantic Goliath groper is a species of fish that are found in usually tropical areas of water that are close to the surface, and they prefer to live in areas like coral reefs, artificial reefs, and pretty much anywhere else they can find a good hiding spot to use to get prey. Their name is accurate as well, since they can grow to be around 8 feet in length. And given their nature as predators, that means people shouldn't mess with them when they see them. Yet one diver did, and was taught a hard lesson, one he'll never forget for sure. Diver Arif Sabir was with his wife off the coast of Florida and was doing some spearfishing. Sure enough, he caught a fish with his spear, which his wife caught on camera. However, while he was celebrating the catch, an Atlantic Goliath groper suddenly appeared and approached the diver, even swimming by him and circling around so that it could look him square in the face. After a standoff, Sabir decided that he had won, so he made his way to the surface, his wife filming the whole event. As he was going to the surface though, the groper followed him, and apparently you could hear Sabir laughing as it did, thinking it was just curious about the fish and wasn't going to do anything. But he was very wrong. The Atlantic Goliath groper lunged out, grabbed the fin of the diver and ripped it right off of his foot. Then the groper rushed forward and ate both the fish and the spear that it was on. Once it did that though, it spun around and swam away, leaving the divers alone. Later on, Sabir would find his spear in a sandbank about a quarter of a mile away. As many have noted, Sabir was lucky that he didn't lose a foot in this encounter. Atlantic Goliath gropers aren't just known for their length, but their powerful jaws, which help them close down on prey, which Sabir almost was in this instance. Plus, there have been many cases of people being stalked or even attacked by gropers such as this one because they perceive them as a threat. Let this be a lesson. Don't underestimate a fish of good size when you're on its turf. It never ends well for you.
New evidence has shed some light on an ancient monster so scary that if it was real today, nobody would dare enter the water. I'm talking about a literal kraken, which is so huge and terrifying that it would make any modern sea creature look like a shrimp. Back during the Triassic period, there was a sea monster known as the ichthyosaur. It was larger than multiple school buses and was at the top of the food chain. Picture the Loch Ness Monster on steroids. However, Mark McMenamin from the Mount Holyoke College recently investigated the fossilised remains of an ichthyosaur and concluded that there was likely an even larger, more dangerous and far more fearsome sea beast prowling the waters at the same time. Evidence of this monster came from the Berlin Ichthyosaur State Park in Nevada. Mark found the remains of 9 ichthyosaurs, each of them measuring around 45 feet or 13 metres long. But he also found that the place where all the bones were piled up was once part of an environment deep underwater. The way the carcasses were arranged suggests that Nevada, or at least this park in Nevada, was once the lair of a huge and impossibly megalithic creature that was feasting on what until now researchers has thought was the biggest and meanest sea monster of the day. The new unnamed sea monster has never been discovered. Its bones have never been found. But of course, that doesn't mean it didn't exist. Judging by the way the ichthyosaur bones were arranged, the behaviour suggests an octopus so large that we can't even fathom it. The way in which the bones of the dead ichthyosaurs were broken indicate that whatever octopus-like creature killed them was so big it could literally snap their necks like twigs.
The Mauisaurus is a type of plesiosaur that lived around 77 million years ago in the late Cretaceous period. Its main home would have been around what is now New Zealand. In its day, it was the largest plesiosaur in the world and perhaps the biggest marine reptile in the waters around New Zealand. There have been lots of specimens uncovered, and one thing the Mauisaurus is well known for is its incredibly long neck. It's like an underwater giraffe. It was about 26 feet long, had a slender body, and was able to move smoothly through the water using its 2 sets of giant flippers. Researchers also believe the Mauisaurus, which was a hungry carnivore with sharp teeth for ripping apart fish and squid, could have probably ventured onto the shore for brief amounts of time. All the remains of the Mauisaurus have been found near the South Island of New Zealand, near the city of Canterbury. If you need proof of how vicious this prehistoric sea monster was, look no further than the Mauisaurus fossil that was found in the middle of a battle with a mosasaur, another terrifying predator from the Cretaceous period. The name Mauisaurus comes from the Maori demigod Mau, who according to the legend pulled New Zealand out of the water by using a giant fishing hook.
Shark attacks aren't always fatal, and they don't happen as often as you might expect. However, they do happen. And as Tyler McQuillan can attest to, they can get pretty dangerous really fast. He was off the coast of California near Santa Barbara with his friends and went spearfishing. As he was doing so, he felt an impact that made him lose a flipper. At first, he just thought his friends had come around to prank him, but as he looked around, he found himself facing a great white shark. What's more, the foot that had lost its flipper was actually injured, making things even worse. The impact that hurt his foot also led to him losing his spear gun, so he had to swim down to get it back while dodging the shark, and then had to use the spear gun to defend himself and ensure that the shark didn't try and kill him. Mind you, all of this was happening while he was injured and against something that moved a lot faster than him in the water. He had to jab it several times with the end of the spear in order to get the shark to go away. All told, McQuillan fared better than most, including only getting 2 broken toes out of the endeavor. No doubt what saved him was the spear gun, because great white sharks have one of the most powerful bite strengths in the whole world and would have ripped right through his wetsuit if given the chance. Thankfully, that didn't happen in this instance, and McQuillan should be very grateful for that. And in fact, he was.
The Kronosaurus was another plesiosaur from the Cretaceous period, just like the Marisaurus, except the Kronosaurus was bigger, meaner, and far more terrifying. It lived in the same waters as the Marisaurus, but a few million years earlier. It grew to be about 40 feet in length, with a skull alone that was over 12 feet long. Imagine a creature with a skull over twice your own height. It could literally open its mouth and swallow you whole. It lived from about 250 million years ago to 80 million years ago, and by the end of its reign had spread throughout quite a bit of the ocean. How did this ferocious marine reptile get its name? It comes from the Greek titan Kronos, so Kronosaurus. It was discovered in 1899, but was not fully understood until just recently. It wasn't until an almost complete Kronosaurus skeleton was discovered in Colombia that experts really began piecing together the puzzle of this extraordinary animal's life. The Kronosaurus had a primary diet of turtles and other plesiosaurs. Because of its ridiculously large size, it was kind of the boss of the ocean in its day. There is some evidence that suggests giant squids could have lived in the same area as Kronosaurus, and it could have eaten them as snacks, but there is no direct evidence. Still, it's pretty impressive if the Kronosaurus could have taken down giant squids.
Jellyfish are very much a type of creature we know as humans to be wary of, because their stings can range from painful to toxic to fatal, depending on the species you encounter. In Australia, we have one of the deadliest sea monsters around, the box jellyfish. And sadly, as 2021 reminded us, any encounter with them can end fatal. In March, a 17-year-old boy was swimming in the waters off the coast when he was attacked by a box jellyfish, and despite the fact that he was treated and got into a hospital in time, he died a week later. Box jellyfish have traits that set them apart from other jellyfish, the National Oceanic Service said of the animal. Most notably, box jellyfish can swim at maximum speeds approaching 4 knots, whereas most species of jellyfish float wherever the current takes them with little control over the direction. And that means that an encounter with them can be well and truly accidental, but no matter how it happened, the results, as you can see, can be quite disastrous.
Millions of years ago, our planet had some very strange turtles. They're called quick-mouth frog turtles, and although they weren't as terrifying as an octopus that was potentially more than 50 feet or 15 metres long, they were still pretty tough creatures for their day. The remains of these fearsome turtles were discovered by paleontologists in Madagascar. They date back to the Cretaceous period, about 100 million years ago. The turtles had faces like frogs and feasted on unsuspecting prey by slurping up mouthfuls of water and then swallowing whatever poor animals got caught in their hungry maws. What's truly fascinating about this turtle monster is that it was endemic to Madagascar. Even 100 million years ago, Madagascar was still an isolated region of the world with its very own fascinating animals. Researchers only found the remains of this turtle because they were looking for dinosaur and crocodile fossils. According to Walter Joyce, a paleontologist involved with the dig, the specimen they found is one of the best preserved turtles from the late Cretaceous. However, they don't know when the turtle evolved, how it evolved, or why it even went extinct. They believe it probably survived the extinction event that wiped out the dinosaurs, so something else must have taken these guys out. But what?
It's time to meet the giant armoured placoderm, known as the Dunkleosteus. The name means dunkless bone, which is a mix of the paleontologist's name who described the fossils, David Dunkel, and the Greek word for bone. This prehistoric monster may not be as large or ferocious as the Megalodon, but it's definitely just as terrifying. It lived in the late Devonian period, around 382 million years ago, and was distributed largely throughout North America, Europe, and Morocco. The most famous specimens came from northern Ohio. What makes the Dunkleosteus so terrifying? It's all in the jaws. The Dunkleosteus was completely toothless, but it had armoured jaw plates that were even better than teeth. It was like having extremely sharp gums, like two perfectly formed chopping blades. In fact, it's kind of like the Dunkleosteus had a bear trap for jaws. The bottom jaw had a slicing edge and a cusp at the front that looks like a kind of fang, but there were no actual teeth. With such an incredible jaw structure, it's no surprise that Dunkleosteus was able to bite with around 21,000 pounds of force per square inch. This means it could chomp through bone and meat like nobody's business. It had roughly the same biting force as the giant crocodile, but that's not the only thing that made this carnivore so terrifying. It was also huge. The Dunkleosteus was the largest fish in the Devonian period at around 26 feet in length. It also wore armour. Not only were its jaws formed from armour plating, but it had a similar armour material around its skull, making it kind of like a battering ram.
And now for something a bit different. Anyone who watches golf knows that sometimes animals go and cause a bit of havoc on the green. But one animal you wouldn't expect to encounter as you play would be a shark, let alone a whole set of them. But that's exactly what happened near Brisbane, Australia. You see, a storm had caused flooding near the golf course, and that naturally raised the water levels up to where the sharks, bull sharks in this case, were able to swim from the waters they were in to the water hazards of the golf course itself. The irony of which is that when the waters went down to their regular levels, the sharks were still there. There were a set of 6 bull sharks going and roaming the waters of that golf course. You know, this really gives a new meaning to the phrase water hazard.
In 2021, a dinosaur was found swimming off the coast of Madagascar in the Indian Ocean. It was found by shark hunters using gill nets to try and rip sharks out from the deep waters. Instead of sharks, they turned up a living fossil previously thought to be extinct. The fish they pulled up was a monstrous coelacanth, a real-life sea monster that has been around for over 420 million years. These fish are incredibly strange. They have 8 fins in total, 4 of which act like limbs and almost look like fish-styled arms and legs. As you might already know, coelacanths were presumed extinct until one was discovered in 1938. But since then, not very many more have been found, making this an exceptionally rare discovery. The coelacanth is one of the biggest bony fish on the planet and can weigh over 200 pounds or 90 kilos, while reaching lengths of up to 7 feet or 2.1 metres. According to a new study published in the South African Journal of Science, gillnet fishing could very well be impacting how many of these legendary fish are left. This is because gillnets basically scoop up everything in their path as they are dragged through the deep ocean at depths of up to 1,600 feet or 500 metres. It is now believed that Madagascar is the only place left on Earth where coelacanths gather in mass. And even though we normally have a predisposition to killing monsters that we find, there are some groups striving to save the coelacanth. I mean, after all, it has been alive on our planet since before the dinosaurs were even around.
In the oceans of today, killer whales work in teams to take down other whales and prey much larger than themselves. But 12 million years ago, there was a much larger predator feasting on the different whales of the ocean. It was a very real leviathan, properly named Leviathan melvillei. Its name came from the biblical sea monster, the Leviathan, and the author of Moby Dick. It was a massive sperm whale that was only recently discovered near Peru. And while it was around the same size as a modern sperm whale, growing to be about 65 feet in length, it was actually much more dangerous. The sperm whale of today has no functioning teeth in its upper jaws, with only some smaller teeth in its lower jaws which it primarily uses for fighting. A typical sperm whale feeds using suction, relying on a giant rush of water to sweep fish directly into its mouth. However, the prehistoric Leviathan had a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, with some of them being up to 1 foot in length. Rather than suck in its food, the Leviathan would use its enormous teeth to bite and tear, just like modern killer whales do, only it had a skull 3 times bigger than a killer whale. The Leviathan was definitely at the top of the food chain. Modern sperm whales tend to eat only squid, but researchers believe the Leviathan used its massive teeth to chomp down on its own kind, eating any whale it could find. Interestingly enough, this giant whale lived at the same time as the mighty Megalodon. 12 million years ago, these two ferocious beasts would have been competing to see who could eat more medium-sized whales.
A very telltale mistake when it comes to people swimming in dangerous waters is that they think they're safe because they know the area or that they've swam there before. And for one girl, she was swimming in waters right off the dock when she was attacked. No, she wasn't attacked on the dock, but she was attacked very close to it. A mere 12 feet from safety, in fact. Wilbur Drummond was next door to this young girl when it happened. He warned her that something might come out and attack, but she didn't listen. Her sister did a great job tending to her. She wrapped the wound in several towels, which became a pressure bandage. The woman was bitten just below the knee, but as to what kind of shark it was, no one knows. This goes to show, though, that any place can have a dangerous predator, and you don't want to take it lightly.
Some of the first sea monsters to appear on our planet did so 500 million years ago. These were some of the earliest predators in the ocean, and some of the largest animals living at the time. The sea monsters I'm talking about belong to a rather creepy group of animals known as Arthropoda. Today, this group consists of spiders and crustaceans such as crabs and lobsters. But between 500 million years ago and now, a lot has changed. A new fossil study led by expert archaeologists from the Northwest University of Xi'an in China has proved that not only were fully developed Arthropoda adults proficient killers, so too were the tiny babies that came out of them. These are the oldest and arguably the most primitive arthropods that ever lived, belonging to a group known as the Radiodonta. They were armed with strange, grasping appendages sticking out from the top of their head, as well as a mouth like a disc with savage toothy serrations used for grinding up prey. At the time they were alive, they would have been giant apex predators reaching outstanding lengths of over 3 feet or almost a metre long. Keep in mind, this was during the early Cambrian era, when things weren't quite so large as they were later on. Back to the new fossil study, archaeologists found that juveniles were only 0.7 inches long at birth. However, they were born pretty much already developed with a circular mouth full of horrifying teeth and spiky tentacle-like appendages with thorns that they could immediately use to begin feasting on other creatures.
The Elasmosaurus was one of the biggest plesiosaurs that ever lived. We have a few different plesiosaurs on the list today, and the Elasmosaurus lands right at the top in terms of size. This massive creature was like a brontosaurus underwater. It grew to be around 50 feet in length and had an incredibly long neck, just like a brontosaurus. Like other plesiosaurs, this marine reptile originated in the late Triassic period and kept on all the way until the big extinction. It could weigh upwards of 50 tons. The very first Elasmosaurus fossil was discovered just after the Civil War by a military doctor in Kansas. If you're wondering how such an enormous sea creature could have ended up in Kansas, which doesn't have a drop of water anywhere near it, keep in mind that millions of years ago the American West was completely covered with water all the way until the late Cretaceous period. What's really incredible about the Elasmosaurus is its very long neck, which contained 71 vertebrae. That's about 11 more than any other plesiosaur discovered. In terms of actual ferocity, you have to imagine that anything 50 feet in length swimming through the ocean with a ridiculously long neck and a mouthful of sharp teeth is going to be pretty scary. In fact, this is kind of like the original Loch Ness Monster. It looks exactly like any artist's rendering of the Loch Ness Monster, especially with its enormous neck sticking out of the water. It makes you wonder if there isn't somehow a prehistoric Elasmosaurus floating around in Scotland somewhere.
This is the story of Bethany Hamilton, who had a terrible shark encounter that altered her life forever. In 2003, her friend, and her friend's family were out swimming and surfing in Hawaii when a tiger shark came out of nowhere and took Bethany's left arm almost clean off. Her friends were able to get her to shore, and her friend's father was able to patch her up enough to get her to the hospital. Because of the nature of the injury, she lost almost 60% of her blood by the time she got to the hospital, but somehow she lived. Despite the loss of her arm and the very understandable mental trauma that could have befallen her, Bethany wouldn't allow that to happen to her. She was a professional surfer before the incident, and she refused to let what that shark did to her be the end of her story. She went back to surfing, and she learned to use her body in a way that allowed her to keep going and even surf professionally again. That kind of resilience is remarkable and shows that even while it's terrifying, you can live on even after one of these gruesome attacks.
A small and not so terrifying sea monster depicted as being the most beautiful killer in the ocean was recently discovered washed up on a beach in Africa. At first glance, it doesn't look like much. The killer animal really just looks like a gelatinous, dazzling blue dragon, no larger than a shrimp. And yet this seemingly innocent creature can kill with a single touch. The monster is known scientifically as Glaucus atlanticus. It's actually a type of sea slug known to feed on other deadly marine animals, such as the Portuguese man-o'-war. When it eats other venomous critters, the blue dragon absorbs their toxic cells and then stores them inside its own body, allowing it to deliver a sting that is even more venomous than what it eats. If you were to touch the Glaucus atlanticus, even with just one finger, you could immediately begin suffering from nausea, severe pain, uncontrollable vomiting, and even death. As for the woman who found the creature washed up on the beach, she was extremely lucky. Instinct told her not to touch, and this ended up saving her life. But not everyone ends up so lucky. Because they are so small, only about an inch long, they can be difficult to spot on white sand. Someone who mistakes the creature for a starfish and picks it up could end up taking a one-way trip to the hospital.
We have some pretty frightening snakes on Earth today. However, in the tropical lowlands of northern Colombia, about 60 miles away from the Caribbean coast, the remains of a prehistoric monster snake have been found. It's been called Titanoboa, and researchers believe it would have been around 40 feet in length. The area in which this fossil was found was once a swampy jungle full of incredible animals like giant turtles, massive crocodiles, and lungfish 3 times the size of their modern Amazonian cousins. This ancient swamp would have been ruled by the giant Titanoboa serpent. It would have looked something like your typical boa constrictor, only it was way bigger and way thicker. Anacondas and boas can grow to be pretty long, but they aren't that thick. The Titanoboa was about as thick as a human person. Just imagine that for a second. A snake that has a body larger than you that could stretch along 2 city blocks and slither through the slime and shallows of the swamp? That is not a jungle I would ever want to venture inside of. According to the Smithsonian, Titanoboa was the largest snake to have ever lived on the planet.
This final story comes from a Reddit user who talked about how when he was younger, his father and him went on a night dive. Fairly standard stuff, right? Except as they were gazing at an octopus, his father tapped him on the shoulder and he noted that from floor to ceiling was a group of barracudas passing over. It was a wall of barracuda from floor to ceiling. We were totally surrounded. They hunt at night, and a school of them were passing over our group. Fortunately, they have extremely poor eyesight and were just checking us out. By his own admission, he wasn't in danger, but that doesn't mean it couldn't have taken a turn for the worse had the situation shifted. With so many of those barracuda, anything could have happened. Thankfully, it didn't.
The black swallower is one of the ugliest fish in the ocean. It also has a very peculiar way of eating. At less than 4 inches or 10 centimeters in length, it has the uncanny ability to gobble up fish bigger than itself. It's known for eating fish over 2 times its length and up to 10 times its own body mass. The black swallower has been compared to the boa constrictor because it swallows its prey whole and doesn't leave any leftovers. It would be as if you opened your mouth and swallowed a person 12 feet or 3.5 meters tall in a single bite. Believe it or not, the black swallower is actually quite common in North America. The only thing is that they live at 10,000 feet or 3,000 meters beneath the surface of the water. Down at these extreme depths, it really is an eat or be eaten kind of world. The black swallower has no scales, it has an unusually long head, and the strangest thing about it is that it has a stomach far larger than any normal fish, which it uses when eating prey much larger than itself. It also has sharp rows of teeth to grab hold of prey. Once the prey is trapped, it moves its jaw up and down until the animal is in its stomach.
If you ask anyone about the most terrifying sea monsters ever, they talk about plesiosaurs, the megalodon, and Kronosaurus. But nobody ever talks about the largest carnivorous dinosaur that's ever lived. No, it's not a fish or marine reptile, it's the terrifying Spinosaurus, bigger than the Tyrannosaurus and the Gigantosaurus. And although it didn't dive down to the bottom of the ocean or use flippers to propel itself in the water, it actually could swim. Keep in mind that most dinosaurs, just like the Spinosaurus, were basically giant lizards. In fact, Spinosaurus basically means spine lizard. According to a report by Live Science, new fossil evidence is pointing to the fact that Spinosaurus may have been the first dinosaur to swim and hunt in the water. Researchers are going as far as to say that the most fearsome creature to have ever walked the earth spent most of its life in the water. This belief is based on the fact that Spinosaurus had short hind limbs kind of like early whales and other animals that spent significant time in the water. It had dense and compact bones just like penguins, and it had wide and flat feet that it could have used for paddling. Then there is its long and slender jaw, which would have been perfect for catching fish. So, the next time you look at a T-Rex or a Spinosaurus, remember these giant lizards could swim and weren't afraid of slithering into the ocean to hunt for food.
One of the deadliest animals in the ocean is an ordinary humpback whale. These creatures are magnificent. They dive deep into the ocean and they can grow over 60 feet or 18 meters in length. The size alone makes it a devastating animal. They weigh over 4 tons or 3,500 kilos and can be wildly unpredictable. Recent footage popped up online showing a monstrous humpback whale coming up underneath the defenseless seal off the coast of Mexico. In the footage, the seal can be seen swimming casually along the surface of some calm blue water. Then a humpback whale comes out of nowhere, rears out of the water so that the seal gets caught on its back, and the seal is forced to surf on the back of the whale for dear life before the monster submerges again, leaving the seal confused by what in the world just happened. Truth be told, the huge whale probably didn't even know the seal was there. That's how big and intimidating these things are. Off the coast of Taiwan, scientists recently captured some of the most horrendous fish anywhere in the ocean. Scientists pulled a small group of viper dogfish sharks out of the water during a survey. What they saw was nothing short of terrifying. These sharks are very strange to look at. They have glowing bellies, eyes like glass, and teeth like needles sticking out of their protruding jaw. The shark isn't that big, but it literally glows and has jagged teeth like an ocean wolf. It lives very close to the bottom of the ocean and feeds primarily on crustaceans. There have been almost no sightings of this scary species, which makes the 4 hauled up off the coast of Taiwan quite special. While there may not be very many of them left in the ocean, nobody actually knows how many there are. So they aren't classified as endangered. Instead, they are listed as data deficient. Even though we don't know much about these sharks, they have been compared to goblin sharks because of how menacing they are. Some of the scientists believe they're closely related to ninja sharks, which are also known for glowing. Thanks for watching. How do you feel about swimming in the sea knowing these monsters are waiting for you? Let me know in the comments, and if you want more content, don't forget to subscribe.